Propaganda by the Seed is a joint collaboration between Edgewood Nursery and the Soulcast. To get 10% off of your Edgewood Nursery order of plants, seeds, and trees, visit edgewood-nursery.com and use Soulcast at checkout. And if you want to support the Soulcast, you can go to patreon.com/SOLEONE. Now, before we get into this episode, let's hear from some comrades in the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Eamon from the Radical People podcast on Channel Zero Network. Did you know that the Earth First Journal is turning 40 years old this year? If you're not familiar, the Earth First Journal is a radical print magazine committed to reporting on resistance and defense of the wild. For 4 decades, they have covered everything from forest defense and sabotage to street demonstrations and lockdowns. If you are interested in reading and supporting the journal, as well as getting some history of Earth First, buy a 1-year subscription now and get the 40th anniversary issue upon release this summer. And if you'd like to receive a 20% discount on a year-long subscription, upon checkout, enter the promo code EFJ40THCZN.
Eliza and Taylor, welcome to Propaganda by the Seed.
Thank you.
How are y'all doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Just sitting
Yes.
here in the shade outside.
I'm inside. It's raining. It's kind of a spring day out there, though it's summer. So we're just starting to get the heat coming on this week for the first time. It's going to hit like 90 tomorrow, I think. So, battening down the houses for summer.
Yeah, we're in a similar situation. It was like 87 here yesterday, and it was just a little too hot. But I tried to stay out of the sun in the midday and had potting up to do in the shade, so it was all right.
When I lived in Maine, anything above like 81 was like, I don't know, you'd almost think it was some sort of like the governor would call some sort of disaster zone because people would just slow down like exponentially and just gripe and can't handle the heat and humidity.
Yeah, but
like,
and anything over 50 degrees, you're like breaking out the pina coladas and shit. It's like,
right.
It's fucking cold up here. They don't put that on the brochures, vacation land. But for half the year. God. Awesome. Maybe before we get started, talking about mulberries, we could talk about just basically like the work y'all do, Eliza and Taylor. So if you guys want to or if y'all want to just talk about like, the work you're involved with, and what your day-to-day love of plants and how it expresses itself through capitalism.
So I guess Taylor, you want to head it off with what you do, and then I'll do what I do, and then we can talk about the Fruit Explorers.
Sure. So I live in Johnson City, Tennessee, Northeast Tennessee, probably like 1,800 feet elevation, 6B, 7A hardiness zone, and I've got, like a lot of people who are into fruit and nut trees. I've got a lot of different stuff planted. We have a nonprofit here, and so over the years, we have formed partnerships with private individuals, with a church, a community development corporation, a school, and we have planted fruit and nut trees on public properties, or basically public parks. I have a little 2-acre homestead that I bought a year ago that I've been planting out. I've got tons of mulberries planted and grafted. A lot of my grafts are coming out this year, so I'm really excited about that. I got rootstock in the ground last year and grafted them this spring. And basically I am orienting towards some sort of silvopasture farm model in the future that I would like to be my livelihood, and I'm still kind of in research and development on what that looks like for me in terms of scale and partnerships and species choices. And yeah, so I joined the North American Fruit Explorers in 2012 as a member, and then somewhere along the line, 2014, Eliza, I don't remember, Eliza and I met at an annual meeting, and Eliza took the board by storm and got some young people on the board. And so Eliza got on the board and I was on the board, and that was kind of where me and Eliza formed our friendship. It was a NAFEX, North American Fruit Explorers, Northern Nut Growers Association joint meeting. And it was kind of this epic tree crops gathering in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And ever since then, me and Eliza have basically just been doing tons of research on tree crops, whether it be books or old newspapers or old archives, and just really nerding out, and have formed a partnership since then. And gosh, we're working on a lot of different projects. We're working on a podcast ourselves, and just doing a lot of fun stuff, and having tons of fun working with tree crops. And so hopefully we'll get into a bunch of the details in this phone call.
All right, awesome. And I look forward to hearing your podcast.
What's it called?
It's called The Fruit Explorers. It's not out yet, but it will be soon. It's just up to Taylor's a bit. Taylor is like a excellence in audio kind of guy. And so we're waiting for it to meet his par.
Yeah. we got 5 episodes in the bank right now, and we're going to try and do it like release episodes once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Good luck.
Awesome.
That's a book, right? Fruit Explorers? Or no?
I don't think so.
If it is, we should know that, but I don't know about that book.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like my wife had some book.
It might have been the one about Frank Meyer, the Meyer Lemon dude. There's something about, I think he was like the
plant explorer, I think it was what that was.
Yeah.
I don't know. No need to derail the conversation. What about you, Eliza? What does your work entail?
Sure. Well, I'm like Taylor, and probably you and Aaron, even though I don't know you. My apologies.
I can guarantee you I probably don't apply to what you're about to say. So.
I'm an uber plant nerd, tree nerd, and so I started out in forestry, and then was pretty disenfranchised with like the whole like old white man cutting down trees movement. And so I soon transitioned over to like growing fruit trees, and I found that like my true passion was in growing apple trees and like everything about apple trees. And it just happens this way for a lot of fruit people, where like you have your like sole crop, and then you just keep getting interested in everything else because you find these people who are like radically passionate, and passion is just really contagious. And so you end up getting into other tree crops and other tree crops and other tree crops. And so then you have to like start weeding out the things that maybe you're not that interested in. So for me, that's like, I'm interested in everything except for jujube.
I've never. That's the only thing that's never been on my list of things to buy. I've always been like, you know what?
Right.
No, I don't need that plant. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's got thorns. There's going to be people that'll try to talk to you into
like me.
You must resist if you have all sorts of other
interests. So, I started out in the heirloom apple realm in Maine, working with John Bunker, and then working with his mentor, Francis Fenton, who was 99 at the time. And so I like quickly got in my 20s, got like hundreds of apples underneath my belt, like hundreds of varieties. And I started to see like a lot of these apples weren't able to be marketed because they were ugly, and not just because of like bugs and fungal problems, but because they like inherently were ugly, like bumps and russet patches and all that stuff. And so I soon then got into hard cider and kind of got swept up in the hard cider movement as like an expert in heirlooms, which is crazy because I was like 28. And then after that, I was like, I'm just not okay with the way everybody's growing these. And so I started to look into using animals as a means of pest and disease resistance, and also as a means of income.
When you say you didn't like the way that people were growing them, can you?
Sure. Yeah, like, so for instance, apple scab, is like one of the most prolific diseases in the United States, and it's one of the reasons why millions of gallons of fungicides are sprayed on orchards. And it's a cosmetic disease ultimately. And so like for me, I was seeing all these cider apple orchards or just regular orchards, but mostly like in the cider realm, they were spraying fungicide for scab. And yet scab is like it causes higher bricks, so a higher sugar content in the apples. And so that's what you want if you're making alcohol. Like you want intensified flavors and higher sugars. And so why are you spraying to eliminate that when you could work on, let's say like you could work on trying to control scab or work with scab so it's not going to defoliate your whole tree while still getting the benefits of that in your fruit. It's stress. You want a stress response. So anyway, that's where I got into animals mostly, was because it was like, all right, if I can get the animals to like eat the leaves or the dropped leaves or pee on them and make them decompose faster so that they're not cycling those nutrients, they're not cycling the spores, and that the sporulation comes to an end, then I can probably like reach this point where, I'm happy with what the trees look like and what the fruit looks like. And that, yes, scab's present, but it's minimal and it's in the ways I want. So that's basically where I'm giving you an abbreviated history of me.
Eliza,
so
can I ask you to go on one tangent?
Yes.
Can you tell the story of how you acquired the nickname of the Apple Queen?
Oh, so part of this for me was like, all right, if we have this problem with spraying, if we are going to have to spray fungicides and antibiotics into the air, I'm going to have to find different genetics so that I don't have to do that, because I am really not okay with all of this. Like, it's all about like health of the farmer, health of the ecosystem. And I don't want any on that, paying like a migrant laborer to spray my orchard doesn't meet my ethical needs. And so I went to Kyrgyzstan, the one of two. So Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan are the genetic homeland of apples. And it turns out not a whole lot of white American women go to Kyrgyzstan, especially rural Kyrgyzstan, in order to, well, at all for that matter. But I started to get a following when I was down there, going from apple forest, because they have apple forests there, apple walnut forests. And so I started to get a following, and then I was called in for a meeting by a newspaper, the largest newspaper in Kyrgyzstan, which is called Evening Bishkek. And it was, just as a quick aside, they were producing this news for the first time ever. Their newspaper was going to be in color because American print news media was going under, and they had bought some newspapers like color print equipment from the United States.
Nice.
And so yeah, they called me in, and I had a translator, and they just started interviewing me. And it was really funny. Like, there's this huge Russian dude who's, I don't know, he was like 6'7", and he was the photographer, and he kept like forcing fruits on me to hold. Like, so I would like have to hold like 10 pears and an apple, and he was like, pause, hold apple. And so, and he was taking pictures. And so when that came out, there was this, it was like on the front page of this colored news, this new color newspaper, and the title was called Secrets of the Apple Queen. And there's there are pictures of me, like this number one picture is me holding way too many fruits, like struggling to hold fruits and smile. And yeah, the whole thing was like totally lost in translation. There's like very, very little that I actually said in there once I got it translated. But yeah, so that's how I ended up with the moniker Apple Queen. And it's funny because every now and then, like, I was walking down the street in Greenfield, Massachusetts one time, and I heard somebody go, Apple Queen! And, like, I didn't see them. I didn't know where they were. So, yeah. But that's a little story. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I love that story.
Just to zoom forward, I got interested in animals and orchards, figured out that was called silvopasture, which I really couldn't stand because, like, the concept of animals and orchards is very old, and so how dare silvopasture steal that from me? But yeah, and so it's just been a metamorphosis of that, and I got into mulberries. I'd say my passion for mulberries is on par with my passion for apples these days. They're just a really incredible fruit. And that probably happened around 2015. And so these days I lease land in the DC metro area. I can't afford it. It's like way too expensive. It's like $30,000 an acre for farmland. And I have a diverse planting of mostly apples and pears and mulberries that I call a drop scheme for my business called Hog Tree. So I'm raising pigs in an orchard setting and figuring out how to do that. And the goal is to eliminate outside feed and to have it all be in-house essentially, and growing on the property. And so, yeah, that's just going to take forever, but I'm 3 years into the new planting scheme. And mulberries are a big part of it. And so they're just, in terms of livestock, like, it's where it's at. So yeah, I sell charcuterie right now online at hogtree.com. Sometimes I sell nursery stuff. If I can ship it, I haven't shipped yet. I'll ship like tiny trees, but the whole nursery, like, online thing has been tough for me. Yeah, so that's a much longer introduction than I wanted to give, but there you go.
It's awesome. That's amazing. I'm just curious, did you get any good samples of Scion or whatever when you went to Kyrgyzstan?
So I didn't get any Scion because it was in the fall, but I did get a seed permit and imported a whole lot of seed. I think I was able to import 2,500 seeds, and from select apples and whatnot. And a lot of those were grown out and have been grafted to a single tree in an undisclosed location. So it has like 120 grafts on it probably.
Whoa.
And then, I'm staring at the other seed lot right now. Like, I don't know if they're good anymore, but I've been slowly sending them to people that want to maybe see if they can try it out, because I suck at growing out seed. I've got too much of a predator problem, like a seed predator problem, and not enough of like an animal predator problem. And so, yeah, I'm happy to send you guys some Kyrgyzstan apple seed if you want to try and grow it out. I'm not sure it's viable anymore, but it might be.
I would certainly give it a try.
Yeah, I'd love to. Most of the seeds I try to grow aren't viable anyway, so I probably wouldn't even notice the difference.
Right. And the thing about that seed is Philip Forsline, who was a USDA plant explorer, and who retired like a decade ago, he found that 1 in 9 seeds from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan are immune to fire blight. So that's pretty high.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Really high. That's insane.
Yeah. So anyway, that's apples, but let's talk mulberries. Oh yeah, and Taylor, we should talk about the Fruit Explorers real quick.
Go for it.
So Taylor and I have started this project that's sort of been in the works for years, which is called the Fruit Explorers. And what we've been doing is it's multi-tiered, but we've been going and finding archives in like people's basements and at universities and all sorts of places. And we've been scanning them and we've been digitizing them so that we can search through this like huge amounts of work really quickly for gems about fruit and nuts and all of that and silvopasture and things like that. So we've been doing that to try and recover a lot of this information that's not accessible and make accessible, because otherwise it's just not, it just sits in a box in a university or in somebody's basement. And so we've been working on that to try and make that more accessible. And we've done some contract work for the North American Fruit Explorers and the Northern Nut Growers Association to scan their bodies of work, like the Pomonas, which is 50 years of citizen fruit science. Like we scan and digitize those, and those are fully searchable on nafex.org when you pay like $17 for a membership. And also for the Northern Nut Growers Association, we just did that with their annual reports. And that's available as a thumb drive through them at nutgrowing.org. But like, it's incredible. It's like all this information, what us fruit people these days, we're just reinventing the freaking wheel. And a lot of this stuff has been done before. It's just we haven't been able to tap into it. So that's what Taylor and I are one of the facets we're out for. And also we were going to go to China this year for mulberries. And that didn't work, but we got sponsored by the University of Missouri Agroforestry Department, like academically sponsored. And so they were helping us make contacts for mulberries, and we had some sweet spots to go and like people to visit, and that'll happen next year, hopefully. But,
we had a Scion import permit to import cuttings. But hopefully next year. Everything's lined up. We've got the places to go. We've got the sponsorship. We have contacts in China, and we're still really excited about it. So hopefully next June we will be in China.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
thank
we're
you guys
finding
for
old stuff and bringing new stuff in.
Yeah. Thank you for all the good work you've been doing, preserving those documents and varieties and all that stuff. You're doing really important work for everyone.
Yeah, so our plan right now, there's Google to like search for stuff. So we're trying to create Frugal. And we've got a website, and we're trying to build a database of all these archives where people can search it. And we're kind of out of our league in building that, and we've been reaching out to people. So if anyone's listening to this and you have expertise in database development, doing web crawlers and spiders and search algorithms and all of this crazy stuff we're dipping our toes into and trying to figure out, it's going to cost some money to host all of this information, because at this point Eliza and I have thousands and thousands of pages of stuff, and we want to make it available. So yeah, we want to make this available to everyone, and that's what we're working on at thefruitexplorers.com. We still haven't launched the website. It's still kind of like private or whatever. It's kind of hidden from the public, but we hope to launch it soon.
Awesome.
So it's just for people who are listening, like, oh, I'm a database person. Would it be just specifically about these archives, or would it be about something else? Or
it's about fruit and nut culture. Just growing fruit and nuts. You know, for instance, a couple of years ago, I learned that a lot of the tree crops in my region came out of the Tennessee Valley Authority breeding program that happened in Norris, Tennessee. And they basically, John Hershey, who was a nurseryman who was friends with J. Russell Smith, who wrote Tree Crops, came down to Tennessee to oversee this tree crops breeding program. And they sent seedlings out and grafts out all over the Tennessee Valley region. And those archives of all of the breeding work, all of the research and the science exist in Atlanta in the Tennessee Valley Authority archives. So I went down there and scanned a bunch of that stuff. And there's just all kinds of fascinating information about growing fruit and nut trees in that archive. And right now it's just sitting on my computer. Either you can go down to Atlanta and search the archives. Otherwise, how are you going to get access to that information? So we want to make stuff like that available on the internet.
That's so cool. That's awesome.
And you know, J.C. McDaniels has an archive, you know, J. Russell Smith, all these people. There's all these archives of correspondence and information that you can't find anywhere right now. You know, and lots of times Google has scanned it and it's on Google Books, and they might give you a snippet view. And sometimes not even that.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's just hard to find good shit on Google. You end up with like the same 10 results for everything, so that's pretty cool. I love the Indiana Jones shit y'all got going on. Just archaeologist element of just going around the world and just getting out there and doing it. That must make it so fun.
Still a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's total treasure hunting.
Yeah.
And it's addicting. Like, it's all it's what I dream about doing. So
that's so cool. Well, what about mulberries? It's so funny because like some comrades were passing around a mulberry piece that you wrote, Eliza, and then Aaron's like, oh, I know her. So here we are. So let's talk about some mulberries. What gets y'all the most excited about mulberries?
Should we tell the story arc, Eliza? Do you want to take a go at it?
You start, and then I'll, because I'm more loquacious right now. So
I'll loop you in. So
okay.
So J. Russell Smith wrote Tree Crops, a more permanent agriculture, I guess in the 1920s, and one of the crops in there is the mulberry, and he talks about the ever-bearing mulberry in that book, and that's kind of what he focuses on is the fruit of the mulberry. And he talks about the Hicks ever-bearing mulberry, which Eliza can talk about having tracked down and discovering. So this is kind of like part one of a multi-part story about mulberries.
Yeah, so I read about this Hicks ever-bearing mulberry, and I was like, I gotta find it. And so I, at the time, actually, there's another person looking for it, and his name is David Shields, and he's like an esteemed professor at the University of South Carolina, and so David sent out a thing saying, anybody know where this mulberry is? And I was like, I don't. But I'm totally willing to go down this rabbit hole with you and find. And at the time, I wasn't a member of NAFEX, and so I went. The route I usually do is like I'll plunge into historical documents, usually at the time I was using Google Books, and just searching every search term possible for trying to find Hicks. And I came up with a couple addresses, and I would double check it with Google Maps and be like, you know what, there could be some trees here. And so I would then write David and be like, these are in Fayetteville, South Carolina. Go check this out. and he either would or would not. And then eventually I got a message from him that was a pinpoint in a map. And he's like, this is where the Hicks are. And he had met Dr. A.J. Bullard, doctor from being a dentist. And A.J. Bullard was basically president of NAFEX, but also he'd been a longtime chair of the Mulberry interest group. And so A.J. Bullard knew where a stand of Hicks mulberry still was, because AJ would graft all sorts of mulberries at his house, but he didn't like the flavor of Hicks, so he cut it out. But he took David Shields and Keith Mearns. Keith Mearns is the director of Historic Columbia, which is kind of like a horticultural group in Columbia, South Carolina. And he took him, they went to this orchard in Mount Olive, or near to Mount Olive, North Carolina, where there were 5 remaining Hicks trees from 1850. And so literally he sent me the pin at, 6 o'clock that night. And I hopped in my car from Northern Virginia and drove overnight. This is how crazy I am. And slept in a Harris Teeter parking lot an hour away. And in the morning went and drove down this sandy path to get to this place.
Hey, Eliza.
And, yeah.
And I'm gonna cut you off real quick and just add something. So why are we excited about the Hicks, right? So I went ahead and pulled up tree crops. So in tree crops, it's a summer pasture tree for swine and poultry is what he calls the chapter on mulberries. And he through correspondence, there's a horticulturalist from Mississippi who he quotes, who says, the everbearing varieties will continue to bear from early May to late July, a period of nearly 3 months. I believe that a single tree would support 2 hogs weighing 100 pounds each and keep them in a thrifty condition for the time that they are producing fruit. And then he goes on to talk about the Hicks everbearing mulberry, and gives some production numbers on that. But that's kind of just so people know, why are we so excited about the Hicks? Why did Eliza hop in her car and drive overnight?
When you say the production numbers for the Hicks, but without getting into you're saying they're very impressive numbers, it produces a lot.
Yeah, prolific. It's so an 8-year-old tree produces a quart of mulberries a day for at least 90 days in my climate.
Damn.
Wow.
A 20-year-old tree is basically producing a bushel or more of mulberries a day. And Louisiana, or the hotter you go, the longer they produce, because they keep producing fruit on new wood. And so I've heard or read of records in Louisiana of, they start producing in late April and they go until early August. And so talk about adaptations also, the hotter weather, constantly producing on new wood. That's incredible. Okay. Prolific bearing mulberry is the Hicks. I've never read an account of of other trees producing more than the Hicks does. It just raining fruits. So yeah, I got in my car, I drove all night, and I arrived to this insane remnant orchard, of the trees were planted in 1850. And as I was getting my equipment out of the car to start taking cuttings, because it was a bit late, some of them were actually starting to bud out already. it was like February in North Carolina. A cop shows up and starts questioning me, and I just turn into like this insane fruit alter ego, and it overwhelmed him so much that he just left. and so I then like went on and took cuttings, and from that, like, I didn't have nothing took. It was too advanced. And so the next year was when I went down and got more, and that's when I had some success of propagating it. But yeah, so on from Hicks, there's like other mulberry, there's other everbearing.
Hey, can I ask you one question about the Hicks though, before you move on from it? Are you 8 years later or whatever? Are you happy with it? You still pump them, the Hicks?
Not really. So Hicks is amazing. It's an amazing bearer, but we have this disease on the East Coast, at least, and probably in the Midwest, called popcorn disease. And it happens in mulberries that have Morris alba genetics. So Morris alba is like the Asian mulberry. And it's like the oldest cultivated fruit on the planet, or cultivated tree on the planet, is Morris alba. And so if your tree, so everbearings are a combination of Morris rubra, which is our native red mulberry, and Morris alba, which is the white mulberry. And we can get into
in name.
Yeah, at least in name. And we can get into that story too later. But some of them are susceptible, some of these hybrids are susceptible to popcorn disease because of the alba genetics in them. And unfortunately, Hicks is susceptible. So, and what that does is it just turns all of your mulberries rock hard. Basically turns them white and rock hard, and they do kind of look like popcorn. And so what I'm working on is trying to figure out if we can use something like chickens to mitigate popcorn disease, because it is a fungal disease. And so if that's the case, and I can get rid of popcorn disease out of Hicks by using like intensive, pastured poultry methods, then yeah, I'm right back up there of being super excited about it. But there are other mulberries around that are everbearing and don't get popcorn disease. And so and Taylor has found some really amazing ones in that regard.
Yeah, popcorn is something we're trying to figure out. I have it here as well. I've told Eliza the story. I'll tell it on here. There's a tree in a town nearby. It's a large tree. It has a white fruit, and I had harvested the fruit off of that a couple years. And then one year I noticed some popcorn disease in it. And then the next year, it's a pretty large tree. Every single fruit on it was popcorned. There was not a single ripe fruit, like an edible fruit. Thousands and thousands of popcorn fruits on it. And so I've been trying to learn about popcorn, and Eliza's been tracking down some information about it. And Eliza came down here last year, and we went on a little mulberry tour of East Tennessee, and there's a rail to trail conversion that was done here, where they converted a railroad into a walking trail. And there's this area where there's just 40 mulberry trees, pretty big trees. And me and Eliza found a tree that was completely loaded in popcorn, and then right next to it, branches intertwined, another tree that had no popcorn in it. And so we're trying to figure out, it seems to be a genetic thing. AJ Bullard, who Eliza mentioned, also talked about popcorn as being a genetic thing. So we're really looking for genetics at this point that have resistance to popcorn and have this incredible, bearing ability that the Hicks has.
Cool. Before we move on, it'd be cool to circle back to a few basics about mulberries, because I'm sure we have some listeners who don't even know what a mulberry is. So if one of you wants to kind of sum up, like, what is a mulberry, and maybe talk about the many uses, because the fruit's awesome, but the leaves are also such good forage that's worth mentioning in the sort of basic description of the mulberry.
I mean, I can handle it, Taylor, unless you want to go.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. So mulberries are, as I mentioned earlier, they're the earliest cultivated fruit in history, or at least tree, the mulberry tree. And the reason for that, so a mulberry tree, it produces mulberry fruits, but it also really, its claim to fame is the leaves. The silk industry is completely centered around the mulberry tree and has been for like 7,000 years. So in the lore goes that in China there was this, like, I don't know, it was some love story in China, and I think some woman that was sent away to think about her like passions for this man. So, and this is probably me completely making the story up, but but she like then noticed that there was this like worm eating these mulberry leaves, and then she noticed that they made a cocoon, and then she like fondled the cocoon and saw that it was like the most amazing material she'd ever seen, and then that was like the birth of silk. So like silkworms eat mulberry leaves, and when they go to become moths, they form this cocoon, and it's the cocoon itself that is made of basically like a silk strand wound up in its encasing. And so from there, they started to farm these worms and feed them mulberry leaves. And then from there, they started to select mulberries that had larger leaves or that produced larger worms and things like that. And so really the fruit cultivation of mulberry came much later, but the leaf cultivation is the oldest form of agroforestry in the world. And so mulberry leaves themselves have protein contents anywhere from 18 to, we've seen numbers like 33% protein. Wow. And just an FYI, like 33% protein beats soy.
Have you y'all ever eat them? Are they good?
There are some mulberry leaves that have been cultivated for human consumption. But I've eaten some young ones. Taylor, have you eaten any young ones?
Yeah, I've eaten some. They're fine. I saw a post. There's a Facebook group called Mulberry Growers USA, and someone from Thailand, I think, was sharing a traditional way of like frying them. I saw it today. So yeah, people definitely eat them, and you can go down that rabbit hole. I haven't gone down the rabbit hole as far as like human eating. We've mostly focused on food for livestock, but there's definitely selections for human eating out there.
Aaron, do you like them for human eating?
They're okay. I know that I think Eric Tonesmeyer is working on, or has been working on for a long time, what he calls the spinach leaf mulberry, which is a variety or a breeding project, I'm not sure, where he's selecting for really tender human edible leaves.
Yeah, that'll be interesting if that comes about.
Yeah,
for sure. Mulberry salad would be an interesting thing to try and sell.
I would probably focus on just my limited knowledge on this. I would probably focus on Morus alba. The rubra has more of a rough leaf, which I don't find as palatable. So yeah, probably the young Morus alba leaves are where to look if you're looking for an edible leaf.
There's also this thing that Jack Cortez is really into, which is like a tree leaf protein extract that it's basically like tofu. And I'll bet with that super high protein content that mulberry leaves would be an ideal feedstock for that.
Yep. We've seen a lot of scientific papers on that. I think in Asia they're doing a lot of work on that, on the protein leaf extract on mulberry.
Cool.
I don't really know much about it though.
Yeah, me either. I've just seen stuff that Jack is like, have you seen this? This is amazing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what they use it for. Is it just a nutritional supplement? I can't remember what that protein extract is used for.
Yeah, I think it was basically like tofu. Like tofu is this sort of, curd congealed out of a water extract of soybeans, and you can do a similar process to leaf extracts.
Huh.
Yeah, I know that Melissa Hoffman of Teal Show Farm in Vermont is really into that, and she's been doing leaf, vegetable, whatever protein. It looks like a pile of green sludge to me.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, but I mean, for vegans and for people and trigans, I guess, it's a really amazing thing to try. And I certainly would love to try it. I just have never looked into the culinary aspects of making leaf protein concoctions.
Wow. As a vegan, all this sounds really cool.
Yeah. So I'll take a stab at giving a mulberry tree intro. And then we can keep just circling back around on all these amazing topics. So there's generally kind of three main species for mulberry: Morus nigra, Morus alba, and Morus rubra. Generally, people tend to think of Morus nigra as less cold hardy and as having the best flavored fruit. And so it's more commonly grown in a place like California or in the Mediterranean. So, I know y'all are in Maine and we're over on the East Coast, so we can't really grow Nigra, supposedly, although I have some pushback on that, but we can talk about that later maybe. And then we have our native Morus rubra, which isn't super productive fruit-wise. It generally has a little bit longer of a fruit, it seems to me, and it has a nice flavor, I think. I love the native mulberry. It's a nice, sweet, tart balance. And it generally only has, help me out here, Eliza, like 1 to 2 fruits at each node. So it's not like highly productive fruit-wise. And it has a rough leaf. And it seems to be more shade tolerant, whereas the Morus alba is a little bit more of an orchard tree. It seems to love full sun. It doesn't seem to be as shade tolerant in my experience. And it can have, I don't even know, up to maybe 12 fruit at each node. So Eliza just found one the other day she shared pictures of. It's just like, it's like just fruit the whole way up on the branch. It's just loaded with fruit. So they tend to be much more productive fruit-wise. And then in the Morus alba, you can either have a white fruit or more of a purple fruit. And typically the white kind of lavender, sometimes they're a little bit of like a light purple. They tend to have more of just like a sweetness to it and less of the tart. Personally, generally I don't find those as tasty just out of hand, but there's a lot of really cool value added things that you can do with those. And then there's also more of a purple fruit color, which tends to have a little bit more of that tartness, and I find more enjoyable out of hand. But the rubra and the alba cross readily. The Morus nigra has this crazy polyploid level or amount of chromosomes, and I'm not sure if it can be crossed with the rubra or the alba. but generally, the gender or the sexes of mulberries are kind of crazy, but generally you're going to have either a male tree or a female tree. And basically a male tree has male flowers and it's not going to set fruit, and a female tree is going to have female flowers and it will set fruit, and persimmons as well. But mulberries are known to change sex and sometimes have both flowers on one tree, but I've yet to see that happen in mulberry, but I know it does. But generally, if you're getting a cultivar, you're going to be getting, a female tree, and they're known to produce early in life. They're known to produce fruit. Year 2, year 3. They're making fruit. So they're very precocious. They're very vigorous in our experience. They grow very fast. And what else generally about mulberry, Eliza?
They're because they're so old, in terms of like being a cultivated tree, they all respond really well to being cut back in a huge way. And so like the way that people were so if you just imagine a silkworm as being livestock, these people figured out a way to prune the mulberry trees so that they would get multiple harvests of leaves a year. And so that might look like you prune and you cut all the branches off in June, and then they all grow back, and then you pick half the leaves off in like August, and then you might do, in more tropical environments, there might even be another harvest period after that. So yeah, they're just like highly adapted towards being messed with by humans. And so that's why these days you often see them like labeled as a weed tree, and like you can't kill it. And that's because humans made it that way. Like like that's one of its claims to fame, is like multiple harvests of leaves every year. And so, yeah, it's seen, and Taylor hit on this a little bit. Another little fact is that, like, we see all the time people saying they have Morris Niagara mulberries in like Michigan or New York or, something east of the Mississippi. And the reason, more than likely, I would say there's a 99% chance that the only reason they're saying that is because it produces a black mulberry fruit. And that's, as Taylor said, Morris alba can produce quite dark fruits. Morris rubra produces dark fruits, and the hybridization of those two produces dark fruits. And so Morris nigra does not like humidity. It really struggles. Even if it's in a place where there's heat, it still struggles with the humidity. So like A.J. Bullard grew a couple Morris nigra that he imported, I think from Pakistan or Turkey. I can't remember which. And it just suffered. And he's in like zone 8B. So, yeah.
So go ahead unless if you got something. So what Eliza was talking about is called pollarding, and you're going to hold the tree at a relatively short height. And there's all different forms of pollarding. Eliza has found some amazing books out of Japan and India where sericulture, traditionally has been a highly refined art. And
sericulture is raising mulberries for silkworms.
Mm-hmm. And so there's all different types of pruning techniques for leaf harvest, and different tree architectures, different times of year to do it, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around all of that. There's like an incredible depth of art and science to that, but basically you're holding them low through pollarding or coppicing, although mostly I see pollarding, which basically coppice is just ground level, pollarding is higher up, a little bit higher up on the tree. And And yeah, so that's how they're holding them low to keep the leaf easily harvestable. And we have seen some really cool mulberry U-pick orchards in Asia. So a little pro tip that we figured out is if you just go to like the Google Translate and type in mulberry and then translate that into Thai or Vietnamese and then take that word and put it into YouTube, it's incredible what people are doing with mulberries in Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, China, India, and there's videos on it, but you can't really access them if you search for it in English. So you got to search for it in other languages. And we found some really cool, like, where they bent the trees into like tunnels that you could walk under and like U-pick, and they're just doing really cool stuff over there that we're excited to replicate.
Well, that's cool.
Amazing.
And the need for that, for translating, is because in most English-speaking cultures, mulberry is like the redheaded stepchild of the fruit and of the tree world. Like, it is so unknown in the United States. Like, it is amazing how little research has been done on mulberries in the States. So you gotta start looking for elsewhere. You know, you gotta go into the Asian countries or the Turkish country, you know, Turkey or wherever, you know, where it's old. But here it's like, it's the problem tree. It's not a solution tree.
It's also like the chestnut. We only know it from old songs. You know, like we hear reference to the mulberry bush, but how many kids actually played around the mulberry bush? You know?
Right.
And I will add, it's probably a bush because it was pollarded.
Yeah, because they're generally big trees.
Yeah.
How does pollarding affect fruit production? Like, because it bears on new wood, can you keep hacking it back and get good producing fruit branches?
Yeah, it depends per cultivar, because some prefer second-year wood, some will fruit on first-year wood, like the everbearings. But it's kind of, to me, you can view it like a fig in a way, like, because they are related. They're in the same family, they're in the same family. So, like, for me, you know, I can graft a mulberry. I can take a bud off of a mulberry from this year. So, like, later this month, I can go take a bud off of new growth of mulberry and graft it, and I will have fruit of some everbearing cultivars coming out of that graft by September.
Wow.
So you when pollarding or pruning heavily for certain cultivars, you'll just get a later crop, basically. And that's like a whole other secret world, is like, I'm 100% convinced that you could prune everbearing mulberries to keep producing much longer.
Wow.
Than what we know of.
That's incredible. Because for me, Illinois everbearing starts producing, they're blooming right now, and they start ripening sort of mid-June-ish, and they go basically the whole growing season. I remember last year when I went to the Common Ground Fair, there was like the last fruit on the Illinois everbearing was ripening. So into September. Like June to September here.
Yep.
Yeah. They're incredible.
That's wild.
I'm curious if y'all have anything to say about the allegations that it's invasive. Like, I have a friend who works, I don't know, in Indiana for like just do like inspections for invasives, and mulberries is one of the, you know, like this guy has like 80 mulberry weeds in his yard. And so, like, in parts of Michigan and Indiana, I guess it's seen as, like, invasive. So I don't know if you have anything to say about like the invasiveness aspect of it?
I mean,
yeah, you take a stab at this first because I have real opinions, Taylor.
I do too. I mean, so where I live,
hey, I just want to say
invasive.
I'm using invasive in quotes. You can't see me.
No, you're
Right.
good. You're good. We're not afraid to talk about it. Where I live, mulberry is not actually invasive in the sense that, you know, you're going to find Morris alba seedlings everywhere. I've been in the Midwest. I've been on the East Coast. You know, I've been in areas where you just see these Morris alba seedlings popping up everywhere. And I don't have that down here. What I have and Eliza has, and so I'm kind of approaching this from a different angle, is Bradford pear. So a new development goes in and they plant Bradford pears, you know, as landscaping trees, and then all of the areas that got graded or were never developed, or whatever, sprout up in Bradford pear. And so we have these insane thick Bradford pear, early succession forests all around here. And, you know, what me and Eliza are into is like, you know, Tai Chi, basically, like go with the flow. And so we've been top working the Bradford pears to these amazing pear cultivars, and appreciate, you know, Bradford pear is Pyrus, help me out here.
Caloriana.
Thank you. And it's a standard industry rootstock. And so we're just grafting onto it and going with it. And I think part of it is this, you know, one of the big arguments I have is we need to be more connected to our food system and recognize that problems are solutions, and that we have this incredible rootstock, you know, germplasm basically that we can graft onto and have pears, you know, the next year or in 2 years. And the same thing could be done with these mulberries. So I hear that it's a problem. I understand that not everyone wants to grow fruit trees. I get that. And, you know, hopefully there'll be more people out there who will think that way and think, hey, let's look at these mulberry trees as resources and let's cultivate them. Let's create a relationship with them and harvest them and prune them and graft them. So that's the way I look at it, you know.
Yeah, I told my friend, I was like, just fucking send them all to my house, dude. Like,
So I also am very much in agreement with what Taylor said. Like, you know, you see it and you can just make it something so much better. So I have two trains of thought with this. The first is to add on to Taylor's, in that there is a lot of research showing like size of fruit and preference for birds. So like if your fruit is 10 millimeters or smaller, it's like way more apt to be spread by birds. And the invasive nature of fruit declines rapidly with the increase in fruit size. And that's just because of preference by frugivorous birds. They're like, oh God, that looks way too big for my mouth. I'm not going to eat that. And so that's one way of looking at all of this too, is like, all right, you don't want mulberry to spread, graft a larger fruit to it, or let's start keeping an eye out for larger mulberries that are fruiting in your area, and work on that as a small like breeding program. That would be my mind's ideal, is that in order to stop invasiveness, we just start selecting for larger fruits. Would be
or manage for leaves.
Or manage for leaves, exactly. And so that's the other thing, is like invasive is, so like if he's got leaves, if he's got mulberry trees popping up in his yard that aren't being eaten by wildlife, he's got a really big problem about wildlife diversity, because everything likes mulberry leaves, because they have a high digestibility, they're low in lignin, they're super high in minerality, and they've got a ton of protein. So like everything eats mulberry leaves, and there's no reason why unless they're fence line, and fence line warriors, I just have no time for. So anyway, that's my one thing. But the other thing is, an argument I often see is, but a master gardener told me that the Chinese mulberry, Morus alba, heavily hybridizes with our native mulberry, Morus rubra, and so that creates a much more of a monster of invasive plant in our area. And my answer to that is, you're right. But you're 400 years too late in your observations, because King James mandated we plant Morus alba in the colonies, as soon as we freaking landed here in 1618 or whatever. And so hybridization has been happening for 400 years. And then 200 years later in the 1800s, we had a silk craze where once again, the United States thought that they could be a major producer of silk for the world. And so they were planting millions of Morus alba in the 1800s. And so the chances of actually finding a Morus rubra on the East Coast, at least, are slim to none at this point, unless you're in a really secluded area that wasn't touched by colonists or silk prospectors in the 1800s. A lot of that damage has already been done, and there's not much you can do about it. And from what my research, the only real rubra specimens that you're likely to find these days are going to be in the Midwest still, where, we didn't head that way early on, and even in the 1800s, people were just starting to cart their ways out. So for me, that argument of the hybridization is really old hat, 400 years old hat. But also, for the everbearings, for example, the chances of having viable seed from a hybrid is somewhat low. It's lower than whether you have a straight alba or a straight rubra. And so we're in several generations down now from that, and so the seeds probably are becoming more viable. But Hicks everbearing is mostly stable. All the everbearings we find are mostly sterile. It's really hard to sprout a seed. So that's what I have to say about that, about invasives.
What about you've talked about grafting. Have you ever had any luck just rooting it from a cutting? Is that possible with the mulberry? Is it that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of our experience and talking to people, it seems to vary by variety or species, and I don't know. We see things all over the map on how to root stuff, but I don't know. My success has mostly been at a weird time of year. So I've told this story probably on the podcast, on a different podcast or something. But, one year we had a big mulberry tree planted and a kid climbed up in it and broke a branch off. And I was it was mid-flower. And so we just, we cut up all the branches and stuck them in the ground, just whatever, we'll try it. And they all rooted. And so, that's when I root now. It's during flower. Is when I root mulberries now, but I've rooted them dormant as well, and I think it just varies by variety. That variety that rooted well in flower is called Oscars, so that's kind of been the one that I've been rooting as rootstock, because I don't really like the fruit on that one though.
Yeah, it just seemed like some cool amateur thing to do. You always see these people selling mulberry cuttings for whatever, $4 or something online. It's shit. That'd be a fun thing to do. Just get a bunch of them and fuck around with them.
Yeah, and my general thought is Morus alba or heavy in Morus alba genetics tend to root well, and even as dormant cuttings. and maybe even Morris rubra if you can find them, will root well. But like hybrids get into this nebulous territory of, at least for dormant rooting, and it seems like people have a lot more success trying to root greenwood, like in June or so, off of hybrids than in rooting dormant wood. And a rule of thumb I've read, is that lenticels could be a good indicator of how well your cutting will root. So like that lenticels turn into primordium, which is like a juvenile or embryonic root. And so they're basically saying like, yeah, if you have way more lenticels per square footage or whatever on your cuttings, then there's a better chance of them dormant rooting. So
cool.
Well, to push back on that though, in my experience, I've only ever seen roots form at the cut end. Have you seen roots form along the stem?
I have.
You have on mulberry?
Yeah, on mulberry. And actually, another thing for rooting hybrid mulberries is pre-callousing. So mulberries root mostly out of the callus tissue, I've found, which is why you're getting that at the cut end, because that's where the callus forms. But I have like taken a strip of bark off a branch on a parent mulberry and let it heal up for a few weeks to a month, and then come back later and take a cutting of that branch, and then had just like a perfect line of roots pop out of the callus tissue where I removed that strip of bark.
Nice.
But yeah, I've definitely had very mixed results with rooting cuttings based on the different varieties. So like Illinois everbearing, which is my favorite for our climate, is difficult but not impossible to root cuttings. I've never gotten Giraldi dwarf to root, and I've heard lots of reports of people trying and failing. But Pendula, the weeping mulberry, I've gotten 90% out of several batches of greenwood cuttings.
Nice. Yeah, so that seems to track with our experiences. Just kind of variable.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are like really headstrong about how you can root any mulberry cutting. So all of you like listening in, you might run across these people who are like, just root it. Grafting is a waste of time and all this stuff, but like not in my experience.
I wish that was true.
I know.
Yeah, I would much rather have a tree on its own roots than grafted or budded. But some of them just don't seem to want to do it.
Like, again, for like the lay person or whatever, you don't see mulberries in store a lot. Like, kind of the only time you eat mulberry is when you get these like mixed fruit packs from Trader Joe's or something. I feel like, there's like mulberries in there and you think you're eating a long raspberry, and people just don't, like, just not used to eating them. And so I'm wondering if there's any food, a staple or something that you find mulberries are like exceptionally good for. Like, an obvious thing I guess would be like jam or wine, but I'm just wondering like as far as edibility, or like,
mulberry molasses.
Yeah. So it totally depends on the kind. Much like with an apple, for example, my base language is apple. So much like with an apple, you can make all sorts of different products out of apples, but it really depends on what characteristics they have in the beginning to determine their end result. And so for mulberries, I'll do another. So for apples, like in New England, people used to make apple molasses out of sweets. And so there's like a whole line of sweet apples that were selected that have very low acidity. And with those apples, they would make the molasses. And that's sort of the same way of thinking about mulberries, is that you're going to have to select mulberries that have very low acidity in order to bring out that extreme sweetness, or at least like to have a non-biting molasses. And so, yeah, if you were to select mulberries that had little acidity, then one of their outcomes could very well be a sugar substitute like molasses. But acidity provides a more well-rounded mulberry, and so in flavor. And so you might be more interested in that for a wine or for a fresh eating. Like acidity really makes, it's like the difference between a banana and like a mango or something. Like bananas have very low acidity, and so when you eat something, another fruit that has almost no acidity, you're like, it kind of tastes like a banana because you don't have any reference points for it. But acidity really brings out a lot more characteristics, and so that would be your better fresh eating, like farmer's market mulberry, or even a wine mulberry would have to have more acidity to it, or at least a blend of sweet and acidity.
That's awesome. I mean, is there anything y'all, like, do you make, like, whatever, fruit leather or tea, or, I mean, is there anything, like, specifically that y'all really enjoy doing with mulberries that you find them very useful for?
I mean, my go-to is freezing them. And then, because the big issue with mulberries is they're just not shelf stable, right? The flavor is amazing, but they mold very quickly. But if I have enough, I've made incredible jam with them. I mean, oh my gosh, incredible jam. And I've made really good, like, mulberry cobbler as well. And I have never made juice. I've gotten juice from, like, the health store. It was okay. I wasn't super into it, but I would be interested in making juice on my own and seeing if it's better. And then drying them, I've bought dried mulberries at the health store, like you're saying. It's typically the Turkish white ones, and they're okay. They're not my favorite dried fruit ever, but I like just throwing frozen ones in smoothies. And then Eliza has been going down quite a rabbit hole with Turkish value-added mulberry products that she can talk about.
Yeah, so they make a lot of fruit leather over in Turkey, a lot of mulberry fruit leather. And so their main products that they have are like mulberries, hazelnuts, and like walnuts that they work with, all tree fruits, which is amazing. And so they do not only molasses and like fresh juices and things, but what they're doing is like they'll make a fruit leather, and then they'll take like a amazing hazelnut paste and they'll put it in the middle of the fruit leather and wrap it up, and then they'll glaze it with like mulberry molasses, and it's incredible. I've bought some and it's so delicious. But they'll put like walnuts on a string, and then they'll dip it into like a vat of basically like mulberry syrup or like a mulberry molasses, and then they hang them up, and then they'll dip them again a couple times to get like more coatings. And so you end up with like these basically it's like a log of walnuts on this string that are just encased in like mulberry goodness. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff out there.
Eliza sent me videos of them making it, and it's like the most mouth-watering videos ever.
Yeah. The walnuts on a string dipped in mulberry must is called Churchkele, which is Churchkele in Turkish. I don't know if that's actually how you say it, but
so we get like Iraqi cookbooks and have like sampled a lot of the food from that area that like most people have just never tasted, like whatever food cooked with pomegranates and pistachios and shit. So just as an aside, check out Iraqi food or food from that section of the world because people are doing awesome stuff out there. It's just
it seems like those more arid countries, they have to rely on perennials and namely trees for part of their food because, they don't have arable land necessarily. Like it takes a lot of water to grow annuals. And so, like the pistachios and pomegranates and mulberries and all that stuff, like they're pretty drought tolerant. So it makes a lot of sense for their cuisine to be more so centered around that.
So, Eliza,
yes.
Last time I talked to you on the phone, you told me some really interesting stuff about mulberry breeding and using induced polyploidy as a breeding technique. And if we could get into that for a few minutes, I just found that whole topic fascinating. And that's kind of what jogged my memory to try and get you to come on this podcast.
All right. So Taylor, let's tag team this one in terms of like lay conversation if we can. So like
sure.
butt in for sure for like, explanations, and I'll do the same. So all of this sort of, it started for me like, how do I even start? Polyploidy for me was introduced through apples. And the reason for that is around World War II, right before World War II, there was a lot of genetics work being done, as we know. A lot of it was for like a pro-Germany kind of thing. But one of the major, so like Mendel, like Gregor Mendel, like the pea plant guy that was, that you have to learn about doing Punnett squares in biology as like a ninth grader or something. So that dude, he died in like 1870. I mean, it wasn't like 1600 stuff. I mean, he made his monk-like observations in like the late 19th century. And so a lot of the genetics that was going on after that was based on Mendel's work. And so what they found was there was this dude, his name was Nielsen Ehle, and he was a wheat breeder in Sweden. And Nielsen Ehle started to notice that every now and then some of his wheat plants had much larger leaves to them and a much larger seed, though they might be shorter. And so he took it upon himself to take a look under the microscope, and he found that this wheat plant had double the chromosomes of all the other wheat plants. And so it was a genetic mutation in that it had doubled its genome, essentially. And so he was like, that's interesting. What happened? How did this happen? But two, how can I work with this? So he did a bunch of experiments, and unfortunately, a lot of this got buried because he was pro-Germany. So a lot of this research got buried. And the United States even took it up, and then like after World War II, it was totally canned. But what happened was he found out that in really cold weather, it's like a very late frost, has more so to do with inducing a genetic mutation like this, or really hot weather can cause a genetic mutation, as can like radiation or chemicals. And so, but for him, he was just focusing on warm weather, cold weather, and radiation. And so he then was like, okay, that's cool. So maybe I can start to get more of these, what are tetraploids, because normally fruits and nuts and plants are diploid.
And ploidy is the number of sets of chromosomes in a cell. So you would have 2 sets if you were diploid. You would have 4 sets of chromosomes if you were tetraploid.
Right. And so he he's like, okay, well, what if I can breed a diploid of this plant? So the original plant that he had planted out. What if I can breed that with the tetraploid mutation, and let's see what happens? And so he did that. He was crossing diploids with the tetraploid mutation, and what happened was he would get like 30% triploid out of it. And so what that is that's 3 sets of chromosomes. So just as a breakdown, he took the 2 sets of chromosomes, or diploid, and bred it with the 4 sets of chromosome mutation, which is tetraploid. And what he got was some diploids, and he got a lot of diploids, but he also got a lot of triploids. And so in getting triploids, he sort of was able to get what we now call hybrid vigor out of his plants, but also they had a whole extra set of chromosomes that would provide more protection against like late frost or against diseases and pests. So you have like a whole other set to depend on now. And so he started a whole breeding program based on this. So like he was trying to figure out ways to get tetraploids, but at the same time, he was constantly breeding back to their diploid selves, essentially, in order to try and get triploids, because triploids were just altogether like more adapted to climate, to the cold climate, more disease resistant, everything. And this correlates, by the way, with like, I live in the South. Taylor and I both live in the South. And as an apple person, all the more so bomb-proof apples of the South happen to be triploid. And just as an example of like being able to stand up against pest and disease, and also like produce tons of vegetation. So anyway.
They generally, from my understanding, what Eliza has told me, they generally have larger leaves and larger fruits, right, Eliza?
Exactly. And so taking all of this work from Nielsen Ayla, the only country that adopted that for apples was Russia. And so Russia has got this incredible breeding program and has had it for years, focusing on breeding triploid apples with certain characteristics. But on the other side of things, Japan, which has a very amazing mulberry breeding program, has also adopted the same breeding protocols, more so, as Nielsen Ayla for mulberries. And so they're taking mulberry is really weird and it's ploidy, like Taylor mentioned earlier. Nigra is polyploidy, meaning it has basically more than 2 sets of chromosomes. But like it can be like a dodecaploid. It can have like 10 sets of chromosomes. And so it's just a crazy thing, and we're not going to talk about that. But for Alba,
just to throw it out there, I read somewhere that Black Beauty has an N number of 128. So yeah. 128 copies of the genome.
Yeah.
Dang. I didn't know Black Beauty did.
So crazy. And it's hard to imagine it to me, like, just as an aside, like that's got to be heat related, like crazy heat spells or something that over time just caused the cultivar to the offspring to keep replicating its genome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, also what's really interesting, I don't remember the ploidy level. I wish I could look it up really quickly, but the ploidy, this is kind of unrelated, but kind of related. The ploidy level of silkworms is insanely high compared to the wild silkworm. This is I'm please fact check me, folks, on this, but the wild silkworm has like nowhere near the high level of ploidy that the cultivated silkworm has. And it's like extraordinarily high. And I went down this rabbit hole and discovered that like basically scientists postulate or believe that there were these paleoploidy events that occurred that sort of are the generative events of eukaryotes, of angiosperms, of all of the diversity of life. They call them these paleoploidy events, where all of a sudden the ploidy of organisms just like vastly increases due to some kind of environmental occurrence. And I think that humans are impacting ploidy levels in ways in the past, in ways that we don't know now how they were doing it. And you see these Morris nigra with these insanely high ploidy levels that also have the best tasting fruit and the largest fruit. And I think something's going on there historically we don't know about. But Eliza's about to go into kind of modern work about stuff we do know about how to increase ploidy. That's sort of my conspiracy theory there on ploidy events.
No, I'm completely in line with you on that. I think it has to be some sort of environmental trigger, or human-induced environmental trigger that brought about these ploidy events, because they are crazy. So Japan has caught on to this research. I guess, when was Moriculture written, Taylor? Do you know? Was it in the 80s or in the 70s?
Yeah, I don't remember. I could look.
Anyway, they wrote this book called Moriculture, which we got our hands on, and it's in English, but it's so rare. There's 4 copies in the United States or something that you have to get through interlibrary loan. But what they were talking 1984. So for the last, say, 50 years or so, Japan has been using the base work of Nielsen Ayla to breed. It's more so for a leaf, but to breed much larger leaves, much larger, thicker leaves into their germplasm. And so it's been basically the same thing, where they use this chemical called colchicine, which I think it's used as, Taylor, do you know actually what colchicine is?
No, I don't.
Anyway, I just know it for its use in plant breeding, but it's got a medical use, and you can obtain it, not even through the dark web. You can obtain it. And so basically what they've been doing is they have a cultivar that they love, and they will wrap a bud in late spring. They'll wrap a bud in cotton gauze, and they'll start every day. They'll administer a certain amount of colchicine to that bud. And when that bud buds out and becomes a stem, more than likely it's now tetraploid. So that one stem coming off of this is a tetraploid, where the rest of the plant is diploid. So colchicine causes a doubling of the chromosome count. So then they take that, they're breeding back, they're creating triploids, and so they're looking for high vigor, because remember, their goal is to be able to cut these things back drastically all the time and have a ton of new growth come back. So that's why the hybrid vigor of a triploid is really necessary, but also the increased leaf size is necessary. And I didn't mention that tetraploids, they have a lower vigor, lower generally than diploid as well. So that's why people aren't stopping at tetraploid, because they need better growth out of it. So and another aside is in the United States, all of our grocery store apples have tetraploid versions of them. and whether they occurred naturally or they occurred through radiation or colchicine, it'll say, like in the GRIN database, that this was a colchicine brought out, or this is a natural tetraploid, or something like that. So, like, they exist from a era long ago. So anyway, go ahead.
Another aside, just to further talk about ploidy and kind of how fascinating it is, the American persimmon, there is a hexaploid 90 chromosome American persimmon that grows like north of the Ohio River, and then there is a 60 chromosome tetraploid American persimmon that grows south of the Ohio River where I live, and all of the large fruited delicious selections, almost all of them, are 90 chromosome hexaploid persimmons that come out of that region up there. And so there's been some speculation by people like Zach Elfers that surely the Native Americans were doing some kind of breeding work and developing this 90 chromosome persimmon. We don't really know how it happened, but it's interesting. It just further supports this idea that there seems to be a correlation between higher ploidy and larger fruits. Maybe not necessarily tastier, but at least larger in like these large American persimmon selections that are coming out of the Midwest.
Right. And so like all the berries we have coming out of the South, like these giant prime arc and like all the Arkansas blackberries, for example, have gone through this colchicine thing where they all have a higher amount of chromosomes than regular ones. So like I think it could totally work for mulberries in terms of fruit. It's just there's been no work done on it, in terms of like, colchicine induced tetraploidy for fruit size in mulberry. Like it's just not a thing. It's all been centered around, at least that we can find, it's all been centered around leaf size. But it's totally doable. And I would love to experiment with that find a native, real, like DNA tested Morris rubra and colchicine it and get the fruit larger and see what we can do about that,
That's fascinating.
I was just going to say, it's also crazy to just hear radiation listed as one of these, like, trigger events, You just grew up on all this science fiction, and it's fascinating to think that actually, no, radiation can, bring about changes in plants.
And one, like, main specific aside, because we don't really have a problem with it here, is what's the I always forget the name of it. It's the bamboo-like it's the bamboo-like plant. Japanese knotweed. So one of the reasons why Japanese knotweed is so invasive is because it's constantly able to change its ploidy to adapt to new sites, new temperatures, new all of that. And so that's one of the things is it rapidly mutates its genome. Like say over a 10-year period, you might have 3 shifts where it's developing. Basically, it's another form of evolution that we never hear about. Is this like natural mutation of ploidy? So that, and then one sticks and then it grows and it fruits and then, you're starting the cycle again and it mutates and another one sticks and so it's able to invade like terrifically well.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any particular reason that you would focus on on doing polyploid breeding with Morris rubra versus Alba or hybrids?
Oh, not really. Just to give everybody that native satisfaction.
Nice.
I mean, it would be sweet to breed much larger everbearings that are polyploid.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about it, I'm like, wow, I want to try that. Like, what would a colchicine Illinois everbearing look like?
Yeah, and I was talking to Miles Sachs, who's grandson of Carl Sachs, and he was saying that they found a lot of they found certain herbicides that also trigger the colchicine response. And he was saying that, that also trigger pollardy, which is like opened up a whole new window to me in terms of like super weeds, and what that actually means.
Yeah, that's wild. What do you know what herbicide specifically it was?
I don't. I'll have to look. I found it in a paper, but I don't know. I'd have to look to know later.
Basically, farmers are creating super weeds, super pigweed by spraying something, probably.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Right, and so that's what I would really love to see. And I haven't even looked. I don't know if you have, Taylor, but, like, is there a paper on ploidy of super weeds?
Yeah, I haven't looked.
Yeah, like whatever the fucking honeysuckle shit that's all over my fucking yard is.
Right?
Fuck that shit.
But yeah, also just a little public safety warning. If anyone is going to play with colchicine, be incredibly careful. It's definitely very toxic.
Yeah, we've seen some people who've played with it too much, and they're definitely a little off.
Oh, man.
It's like, dude, that's what colchicine does.
Yeah, those
Eliza,
weird polyploid humans.
Yeah. So Eliza went down a rabbit hole trying to identify some organic colchicine production methods.
I don't even remember this rabbit hole.
So the autumn crocus, it makes colchicine, right?
I think so. Dude, you're remembering a conversation we had a long time ago. Go ahead, go for it, because I don't remember any of this.
I just know that autumn crocus creates in its roots or in the plant somewhere is a mutagen chemical that can be applied to plants to create these kind of mutations and ploidy events. I don't remember a whole lot about it. There were some scientific papers on it. If you wanted to try and make your own colchicine instead of buying some chemical or something. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about all of this. Personally, I don't know what I think about all of it. I've never done it. I don't know if I ever will, but it's definitely fascinating to think about.
Yeah, Taylor definitely offers me healthy pushback on some of these ideas.
Nice.
By like using words like GMO.
So, yeah. But it seems to me like we're sticking with the same base set of genetics. We're just multiplying them.
Right. It's not a transgenic operation.
Yeah, well, I think we have access to all these tools, and I think what makes all the GMO stuff that's available so bad is what they're using the tools to do. So most of it's like Roundup ready or whatever. So they're using this incredibly powerful tool to make, a plant that you can spray unlimited amounts of herbicide on. And that's like a terrible use of that technology. But if we can use some of these tools to breed for, really big mulberry fruit or really long season or really high protein perennial leaf fodder, I think I'd be more open to that for sure.
Yeah. And I think back to like the invasive topic, like I think this could be a way to more so easily increase the fruit size on things like Bradford pear. Like what if you applied colchicine to every Bradford pear tree you see, just a few drops a day, do your, for like however long, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then that branch produces a tetraploid that's got huge Bradford pear fruit comparatively. And then just let those cross naturally, so that then you're My God, I mean, that's what I want. I want larger Bradford pears. I want it to happen.
Well, I'm just going to create...
I'm going to get blacklisted by the government for this.
Yeah.
Accidentally create super Bradford pears.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grafted some Bradford pear, in a ditch in Portland last spring, and basically all the grafts grew at least 6 feet, and most of them are blooming now. So yeah, they are pretty incredible plants.
Yeah, they're the best. They're the best fruit stock we have in the States, as long as you're warm enough to grow them.
Did y'all ever see that Kickstarter for those people who were trying to breed bioluminescent plants by crossbreeding, like, trees with jellyfish in San Francisco? They raised, like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands on Kickstarter for, like, bioluminescent plants. No. Yeah. Anyway, I went back. I was trying to find the Kickstarter page, but it's been deleted. But it just, like, made me think of bioluminescent mulberries while you're at it, But don't do it. Don't even try it.
Don't. Hey, one other thing I would be interested in mentioning is just Eliza and I have been thinking a lot about harvest technology. One of the tricks with mulberries, they're oftentimes these 30-foot tall trees full of fruit. And how the heck are you going to harvest them? And so we have been working on some tree shakers and some tree harvesters, and also going to be hopefully making a bunch of value-added products this year. Eliza got to hook up on a what's it called? A balloon press. What's that thing called?
Oh yeah, a bladder press. Bladder press. So we're going to try and, really develop this line of thinking around making mulberry molasses, mulberry juice, mulberry wine, maybe make some like shrubs. And so, yeah, we're pretty excited to experiment this year. Mulberries are just coming online where I'm living, and I think they've come online within the past couple weeks where Eliza's at. And so we're going to try and harvest a bunch this year and play around with them.
Very cool.
Maybe make some ice cream.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's been one of the major limitations to mulberry, and maybe why it's never really hit the scene, is because they are difficult to harvest. They have no shelf life. They need to, unless you're working with a system of tarps, generally speaking, like, in a tree shaker, it's really hard to get them. You can't just, picking mulberries is pretty time consuming because they are indeterminate in that they ripen all at different times over like a 2 or 3 week period or a month long period. So Taylor and I are really, and also a friend Nick, are working on, ways of making this way more efficient for people to harvest them.
That's awesome.
And that's another thing that we're looking for as well. We're interested in the everbearings that produce fruit over a long period of time, but we're also really interested in these determinate varieties that maybe do ripen their fruit over like a 1 week period so that we could have a really efficient harvest. So that's another thing we're looking for. Reportedly, Cucuso number 20 is somewhat determinate in that way with a shorter drop.
That's what I got.
Window. How big is your tree?
3.5 feet tall. I just got it from Perfect Circle Farm.
Gotcha. Nice. Yeah. So it's got a great. That's a silk cultivar that came out of the Japanese breeding program, and it's one of many Cucuso releases. There's like Cucuso number 20, Cucuso number 21. There's all these different Cucusos, but you'll find that has a nice big leaf, and that might turn out to be one that you might enjoy eating. I don't know.
Hey, anything with little bugs that my kid can, observe, and by my kid I mean me.
One more anecdote I could request from Eliza is I've been seeing on your social media that you have a potentially record-breaking pig.
Oh yeah.
What's up with that?
She is either 6 months away or a year and a half away from being the oldest pig on record to ever exist. And so I got her. I bought her in the 8th grade, and I'm now 36 years old. And so, but the problem is, like in 2003, my house that I grew up in was hit by a hurricane, and we had like 7 feet of water in the house. And so like all of our records and all of our photos and all of that got destroyed in the flood. And so we have no proof that she's this old. And so I've been currently leading a social media campaign to find the breeder of this pig. Her name is now Kathleen Myers. Her name was Kathleen Plauchet. And she was head of Ponderosa Mini Pigs and Starlight Show Pigs. She's partners in Starlight Show Pigs. And so anyway, I was like this pig obsessed teen, and like talked my parents into letting me buy a pig from Texas, and they flew her in. And she's an absolute jerk, and she's either 21 and a half years old or 22 and a half years old. And the record is 22 years, 359 days. So I'm actively searching through. I've caught some leads as of late, and it's like there really needs to be a mockumentary made on the mini pig industry of the 90s, because like, just as an example, as a little like, if This American Life listens to this, you might want to cover this story, because there was this woman who she is a former NFL cheerleader who turned into like one of the preeminent mini pig breeders of the 90s, because they were only imported in the United States in like 1989 or 1987. And so she retired from being an NFL cheerleader and went headlong into being like a consultant and breeder of mini pigs. And that lady is, I've been in conversation with her. She's like 75 now or something, but she's been helping me to try and find her former partner, Kathleen of Starlight Show Pigs. But apparently they had a falling out, and then Kathleen, perhaps this is all based on like people sending me intel from their internet searches, but like Kathleen became like heavy into the ministries. And so I don't know. I think I have her address currently. I don't have her phone number because I've tried calling them all, but we're hoping that she's still got records in a box somewhere that little Eliza Greenman bought a pig in like 1997 or 1998. And so we can make her the oldest pig ever.
Oh, that's awesome. That's hilarious.
Story.
Good parents. Good parents.
I guess. She's an absolute jerk. The pig, like if we win, if she gets the title of world's oldest pig, there's not going to be like a family photo because she's going to bite us. So it'll just have to be like her with like drinking a glass of champagne or something, because that's what she does. We give her champagne every now and then. So
it's a lucky pig.
Really quick. When I was a young teenager, so like 13 or 14, I used to walk down to the neighborhood market and ask the man, I won't say names, and ask the man behind the desk, if I could have any like old beer that he might have to give to my pig so I could trim her hooves. And he would give it to me. He would give me like a 32-ounce bottle of Bud Ice in like a paper bag that hadn't sold for 2 months. And I would go home and get the pig like rip-roaring drunk, and then take a Dremel and wear her hooves and trim her hooves. And I did that. I started like a little business of like, there weren't that many potbelly pigs in the area, but I had like the market on trimming hooves. So this like 13-year-old would show up with a 32-ounce of Bud Ice.
Oh my God.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
What a great story.
So there you have it.
Eliza's pig roots go deep.
They go real deep.
That's so cool. How's she doing? Is she still healthy?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Pretty blind. I don't think she can see. She doesn't walk into shit, so she must not be totally blind. But and she's slightly arthritic in her back legs. But, she walks around. She gets out of her little house every day and comes to eat and lays in the sun and all that. So, she's fine. Like, maybe she's learned to echolocate. She's really freaking smart, so who knows?
I think as long as she's got champagne, I think that's a happy pig. Yeah. All right, well, as we are winding up, if people want to track your work, help you build a database, track down your pig dealer, or track your work, or get in touch with y'all, what are the best ways for people to follow y'all?
So email us at thefruitexplorers@gmail.com for like cool specimens and anything else fruit related and database related and, furthering our cause. And then I guess Taylor and I don't have a united like Instagram page, but we do have a Facebook page called The Fruit Explorers that hasn't been updated in years, but we're hoping to do that soon once we have something to show for it. So
yeah, mostly me and Eliza just use our personal accounts on Facebook. So you can find us in many of the Facebook groups. We post in there all the time. And Eliza has her blog. If you want to plug that, Eliza. And then we will be launching thefruitexplorers.com here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, my blog is elizaapples.com, ELIZAPPLES.com, and that's for the world's nerdiest musings on apples and fruits. And I don't really respond to comments, so don't comment.
Good.
I can't ever remember the password anyway to like unlock how to respond to comments. So
that's awesome. Well. Thank you for all this work y'all are doing and just taking us deep into your world of mulberries and radical botany.
Yeah. Thanks for hopping on the phone, you two. I immensely enjoyed that, and definitely learned a lot.
All right, cool.
All right, thank y'all. Take care.
With protests continuing in cities all over the world, the Channel Zero network has some reminders on how to support those who have been arrested, and those who may be arrested in the coming days and weeks.
Arrests are one tool cops use to repress mass movements. Arrests keep protesters off the streets during demonstrations. They scare people with the threat of court cases and potential prison sentences. Alone, we feel defenseless against the police and the courts. By providing jail and court support, we can push back against this repression, from the moment our comrades are taken in to the end of their court case.
Before heading out into the streets, make sure you and everyone you're with has a contact number written on their body. You'll need to get in touch with someone if you're arrested, and you most likely won't have your personal belongings with you. This number can be the National Warriors Guild, a group you're currently involved with, or just a friend who's not at the protest.
If you see someone getting arrested, call your legal support number with the arrestee's legal name and birthday. If you're in a large city, you may have to determine where they will be taken. Try to find the arresting officer's precinct or unit. This may determine where your comrade will stop. In smaller cities, everyone may go to the same place.
If you expect more arrests, try to stay and observe. If not, you should head to the precinct and wait for the arrestee.
Once at the precinct, use the legal name and birthday of the arrestee to ask the cops for the arrest number, charges, and where the arrestee will be taken or held. Keep anyone supporting you in the loop.
Be prepared to wait many hours. Keep in touch with others and take turns waiting outside the precinct. In some cases, it may take the whole night, especially if there's been a mass arrest.
From here, each city and state has different processes and different jargon. Connect with local organizers and read about local laws to learn what the process will be in your area. Here are some things you might encounter.
Sometimes arrestees are released quickly with a notice that they'll need to show up in court at a later date. If this happens, take the contact info of the arrestee. You'll want to be ready to offer them court support in the future.
Sometimes, arrestees are charged before release. This is a longer process, usually called arraignment, which is a procedural court hearing to file charges and set bail. The court will assign a public defender for arraignments. Try to have a couple of friends attend the arraignment for support. Due to COVID-19, you may only be able to observe via video.
Sometimes arrestees will have to post bail to be released. If bail is set, let the court officer know you're arranging payment and will be coordinating with the arrestee's lawyer. If you need support making bail, connect with local organizers. There may be a bail fund for protesters in your area.
No matter what happens, always relay what's happening to other people offering support.
Regardless of the legal situation the arrestee ends up in, you'll need to bring some things with you. People who are getting out may be exhausted or have trouble getting home. So bring snacks, water, aspirin, bus fare, transit cards, and cigarettes. If you have a friend being held, you can bring their favorite snacks. If you know the arrestee requires specific medication, make sure to bring that too.
You'll also need water and snacks to sustain yourself. Bring external batteries for charging phones as you may be waiting many hours.
If you can't stay and help with jail support, dropping off materials to those waiting can be a big help.
Unfortunately, there is a high risk of exposure to COVID-19 while in an enclosed jail cell. Arrestees should consider self-quarantining and getting tested.
For every street action and every viral video of arrests, there are dozens of people outside the spotlight supporting the movement. It's not over till everyone's safely gotten out of prison and everyone's beaten their charges.
Check out Rebel Steps jail support episode at rebelsteps.com/jail support for more tips and resources.
And follow Unicorn Riot and Channel Zero Network member It's Going Down for more updates.
The Channel Zero Network sends y'all solidarity.
Stay safe out there and never stop fighting for a better world.